Japan's role in the Second World War. First of all, we need to understand why Japan came into the war. By the 1930s, Japan was having an increase in population with little natural resources or depleting natural resources. There was the 1930s Great World Depression, which affected Japan as its silk industry was not doing well. At the same time, a war was about to happen in Europe. And Japan thought that the only way that it could increase its economy was to conquer the neighboring countries as well as to create an Asia for Asians campaign, which actually was gaining territories for Japan so that it could feed its own people and get the necessary raw materials or resources. Before the Pearl Harbor, the Japanese had already begun imperial expansion in Manchuria in 1931, Inner Mongolia in 1936, Johor 1933, China 1937, and in other territories and islands during World War I. The Empire of Japan entered World War II on September 2nd, 1940, when it invaded French Indochina and made its entrance into the official war 5 days later with the signing of the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy on 27 September 1940. Although it wasn't until the attack on Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1945 that the US entered the conflict. Over the course of 7 hours, there was coordinated Japanese attacks on the US, Philippines, Guam, and Wake Island, Dutch Empire in the Dutch East Indies, Thailand, and on the British Empire in Borneo, Malaya, and Hong Kong. The strategic goals of the offensive were to cripple the US Pacific Fleet, capture oil fields in the Dutch East Indies, which is actually current Indonesia, and maintain their sphere of influence of China, East Asia, and also Korea. It was also to expand the outer reaches of the Japanese Empire to create a formidable defense perimeter around newly acquired territory. The Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945 was a military conflict that was primarily waged between the Republic of China and the Empire of Japan. The war made up the Chinese theater of the wider Pacific theater of the Second World War. The beginning of the war is conventionally dated to the Marco Polo Bridge incident on 7 July 1937, when a dispute between Japanese and Chinese troops in Beijing escalated into a full-scale invasion. This full-scale war between the Chinese and the Japanese Empire is often regarded as the beginning of World War II in Asia. Japanese invasion of China. China fought Japan with aid from the Soviet Union and the United States. After the Japanese attacks on Malaya and Pearl Harbor in 1945, the war merged with other conflicts which were generally categorized under those of conflicts of World War II as a major sector known as the China-Burma-India theater. Some scholars consider the European War and the Pacific War to be entirely separate, although concurrent wars. Others consider the start of the full-scale Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937 to have been the beginning of Second World War. The Second Sino-Japanese War was the largest Asian war in the 20th century. It accounted for the majority of civilian and military casualty in the Pacific War, with between 10 and 25 million Chinese civilians and over 4 million Chinese and Japanese military personnel missing or dying from war-related violence, famine, and other causes. This war has been called the Asian Holocaust. Why was it that the European powers fell? Colonies of the European powers fell to the Japanese. The main reason was they did not have enough naval and air power in Asia because the European countries were fighting the war in Europe with Germany and Italy, and their energies and resources were all focused over there. This gave the Japanese the advantage of moving forward and conquering land after land. On the other hand, Thailand itself wanting to be a buffer state and to ensure its sovereignty did not resist the Japanese. And thus, the Japanese were able to conquer Thailand as well and move into Malaya and to Singapore. In Singapore in 1942, the war was fought and it was conquered. The main reason were the British were having a thought that Japan will attack from the south and not from the northern part. They also did not expect the Japanese to have greater agility. The Japanese soldiers arrived on bicycles and conquered Singapore. During the Second World War, Singapore faced a lot of atrocities. The Chinese population were tortured and mass executed by the Japanese army. Singapore was renamed Shinanto, a Japanese name. The Japanese currency, also known as banana money, was used. Japanese anthem was played, and the Japanese language was taught in schools. Japan ended the war in 1945, shortly after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the US Army. One consequence of the end of the Japanese War or the conquest of Japan in Asia was Asian countries realized that the European powers were not as strong as they were thought to be so. And this eventually led to nationalism and a desire by the Asian countries in Southeast Asia and Asia as well to be independent of colonial powers. And it started with the independence of India in 1947. And slowly, one by one, the countries in Asia and Southeast Asia became independent of Western influence or European colonialism. With that, I end my session today. I wish you a wonderful day ahead. We shall meet again tomorrow.
This is Distinguished Toastmaster Brahma Kumar signing off from you.